Maybe you have a history that left you, unfortunately, feeling like an abandoned person. And if so, this current relationship might be triggering that, but it's not the cause, and it won't be the solution. So you might want to consider the possibility of having a kind relationship with feeling like an abandoned person off and on the rest of your life.
In your book, you talk about daily disturbances and relationships. Like it's not about finding this perfect partner and it will be like blissful every day. That's the romantic movie version. You're floating in joy. So how do you work with your daily dose of disturbance in a relationship? I just want to quickly thank you for beginning to watch this podcast episode. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do so. Would love it if you join our community. You'll also be up to date on the latest content, and this really helps me reach out to more guests. You can also visit our website, centerformindfulness.ca. There's free events about mindfulness and laughter. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm truly thrilled to have a conversation with Bruce Tift. He's the author of Already Free. What a beautiful name of book. Already Free, Buddhism meets psychotherapy on the path of liberation. First, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So for those of you who are not as familiar with Bruce's work, I'll be reading a bio. He was a licensed and marriage family therapist and was in private practice since 1979. He also taught at Narupa University for 25 years. I actually looked up their description, Narupa University. I really like how they describe it on their website. It's a Buddhist-inspired, non-sectarian university rooted in contemplative education, combining both East and West. Can imagine a lot of rich learning there.
A lot of neurosis too, of course.
Like all places, right? Of course. Bruce also worked in a psychiatric ward and as a family therapist with social services, and given presentations in the United States, Mexico, and various countries online as well. He's a long-time meditation practitioner, over 40 years, and had the good fortune of being a student of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I actually would love to start there, because the wisdom that Chögyam brought to the world and to the West was pretty profound. And in preparing for today, I actually rewatched a documentary. It's called Crazy Wisdom.
Right, I remember that, yes.
Which was about his life. And he was a Tibetan monk, and I know you'll share more about him, but for those who are not familiar, very influential, and really challenged a lot of beliefs. And he was a monk that actually got married. He smoked, he drank, and truly brought profound wisdom. So we'll speak a little bit about that maybe. How did you get inspired to connect with Chögyam, and what was it like being with him? I wonder if we can begin there.
Sure. Like everything, there's so many different factors that all come together. It's not like there's a simple cause and effect, of course, to any story.
Yeah.
But the simple version is that I left the country in my mid-20s and picked up a motorcycle in Germany and went around North Africa and overland to India and Nepal. And I was gone about 2 years traveling by motorcycle. I was a hippie at that time. And was really impressed with the Tibetan refugee communities that I happened to come across, and studied with a Tibetan teacher, Thupten Yeshi, up around outside of Kathmandu for just a month or so when I was traveling. And then when I came back, met Trungpa Rinpoche, actually at the local Unitarian church that my family had, been to for a long time. and it was sort of like the same mind. It was very interesting,
Mm,
very impactful. And he was in this big crowded hall with all these crazy Unitarians, all wanting to, uh, be heard. And he seemed to just respond to everybody to who they were somehow. And I was very, very touched and
mm,
uh, sort of surprised by that. Anyway, connected with him and then ended up in Boulder, Colorado, a couple of years later, where he then moved to start his main center. And then, so starting at about 74 until his death in 87, both my wife and I were very involved with his community there.
mm. So you had quite a time range, quite a big time slot which you were with him and you learned. And so what really struck you the most about him? I'm just curious because this is quite rare for someone to have been with him, and seems like the teachings are still with you. So what struck you about his teachings?
Well, a lot of things, but at the moment, what comes up was how scary it was to be around him. Because my experience, anyway, is that he didn't seem to be uh, able to be manipulated. All of
Mm,
us students wanted him to like us or approve us or tell us the right way and stuff like that. And he was just beyond my comprehension, which was very disturbing, because I
mm,
wanted some something, a reference point, I guess, to rely on. Uh, he drank, he slept with students, he did all these things that you're not supposed to do, and
mm,
he would be drinking during a talk. But even when even when he was drinking during a talk, I never experienced him as ever having anything but a clear mind. It's just very interesting, and a lot of people had a lot of different experiences with him because he wasn't sort of like an A-OK homogenized teacher.
mm,
Was in this crazy wisdom lineage, whatever that means. But I never personally experienced him as doing anything harmful. I just experienced him as beyond comprehension. Uh,
mm,
and he was all over the place, as far as, setting up sort of a court, which was very anti-American to my taste. uh, and he would come up with some new thing, and uh, so I think the most profound teaching wasn't, the literal dharma in words. It was just being around somebody who actually seemed, to me anyway, to be a manifestation of awareness with
mm,
no personal identity that I could ever sort of pin
mm,
down. And so I think that was maybe over time, that was just a very profound presence to be around. You know,
mm. Yeah, there seems to be a certain amount of like fierce energy, and being truthful to who he was, just not trying to fit into a mold of what a teacher should look like or what people expect of him. And that really landed. I mean, but he wasn't doing it to get approval. Like he wasn't being this way. Like that was my understanding is, he really wanted to understand Western mindset to bring these teachings to the West. Like he really,
and he was sort of a genius at that as far as his language. I mean, he he wasn't like fluent like a native speaker, but he really used language in a very powerful way. And he would, just one little story. I wasn't present, but that might give a flavor for his teaching. Actually, was that he was being escorted up some stairs by his attendants, and they weren't paying attention. And
mm,
apparently, he just let himself fall backwards down the stairs. You know, for the
wow.
for them to catch him. So he didn't seem to be having some self to protect or to sort of be recognized. And he
Mm.
would have this screechy voice, and he would sing the anthem that he came up with, and it was so horrible. I was so embarrassed. It was such a bad voice, and he was not embarrassed at all, you know. So that was disturbing to me.
Yeah. And he's, it seems like that didn't bother him. Like, not apologetic. Like this is how he was, and yeah.
It was beyond even not apologetic. It was just not in that realm, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, different people had different experiences, of course, but that was, you know, sort of flavor of my experience being around him.
Yeah. For me, he's like broke the mold of what one has to, look like or be in practicing meditation or following any tradition, and really breaking the mold. And there's something that really struck me, and I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. Apparently, I don't know if it's true or not, but he has said that if someone pushes the nuclear button and creates pain and destruction somewhere, that he would kill this person, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm like, wow, first time like hearing like a monk would say something like that. I would kill. And I thought, wait a minute. So there is a time. So it's not just like, don't touch anything, just be this doormat, compassionate doormat. It's like, no, sometimes we need action. So can you speak a little bit about that? Like this taking action when it's needed, and
Well,
compassion is not an action.
as I've been suggesting, I never had any sense of his presence, his life, his teachings as being formulaic.
Yeah.
It's so present a response to immediate energy that it seemed like he both taught, but on some level, but more his presence, I think, is
Mm.
that one among hundreds of ways of talking about practice, maybe, is that we're increasing our tolerance of openness and intimacy with life, with ourself, with immediate experiencing. And out of that open, intimate engagement, there is always some intelligence at work. And that it's more the point of cultivating that capacity of open, spontaneous, non formulaic engagement than to have a correct way of engaging with life. But
Mm.
of course, that doesn't give you any guidelines, really.
Mm.
You don't get any comfort in knowing you're being a good practitioner or a good person
Mm.
or you're doing it the right way. So it's very disturbing, you know.
Mm.
Maybe you're making a mistake. Yeah, he didn't try to save people if they were making mistakes, you know.
But there's something about, can you say more about this open-hearted in terms of practice? What does that mean, this open-hearted?
Well, the first one of the earlier times I talked with him, I was very proud that I had this practice of going into this tunnel and arising where there's no thought and no, you know, something in there. So I was, he just said, just be open, you know, and I don't know, you know, there's something very profound, and that has made sense to me ever since. That to hopefully increasing depths of understanding, making returning to openness the reference point rather than the breath or compassion or
Mm.
immediacy or something like that. Just open, or I would currently say open awareness. No form, no ascribable qualities. You can't put your hand on it. You can't capture it with senses or with thoughts. It's just this open awareness. And I think a Buddhist Vajrayana sort of view, probably others, is that out of immediate embodied open uh, experiencing, there seems to be an organic uh, sense of compassion. That just seems to be
Mm.
a relative expression of openness. And
Mm.
no, there's not anybody can prove it. You know, you can't. You know, I mean, maybe they can do scientific studies or correlate, but it's just an assertion, and somebody has to check that out for themselves. But I have found that to be accurate. That the more that I am able to return to some sort of embodied, immediate openness, kindness, that there seems to be a spontaneous, compassionate response because, well, let's say because, just a speculation, we're not perpetuating the fantasy of being separate from others,
Mm.
separate from ourselves, separate from our emotions, separate from others, separate from life, separate from the universe. And it's just like I might sort of mess around and bite my finger,
Mm.
but I'm not going to hurt myself. I just,
Mhm.
unless there's some distortion going on.
Mm.
And so if we actually experience ourselves increasingly as just an expression of life, I think it's sort of organic that we relate to other life in a kind way, just like we
Mm.
try our best to treat ourselves in a kind way. There's a lot of distortions as humans we have to deal with, but still, I think behind those distortions, from what I can tell, is always our best effort to take the best care of ourselves possible.
Mm. So this openness actually it's countering the separateness, like when the othering, whether it's someone who honks in traffic, they honk at us, and now it's them, and there's a separateness. So if we use that as an example, someone honking in traffic, getting upset, so we're opening up to both our own experience of being upset, oh, why is this person honking at us, and opening to this other person and their agitation towards us. Is that one way of looking at it?
Yeah, that's still talking about opening to an object, which is fine. That's path.
Mm-hmm.
Openness itself doesn't. I think there's always relative and absolutes, but
Mm-hmm.
the point isn't to open to something as much as open, and then what is there. And so
Mm.
that would be the trigger, the person, let's say, and then we, on a relative level, we could say, well, I'm opening up to my irritation. But if we keep going deeper, we're probably going to find a moment of panic. Somebody
Mm.
honks at us and we, feel startled, we feel unsafe for a moment.
Yes.
Probably what we're actually doing is opening to our own panic as past still. And gradually, with more and more familiarity, we may find that panic isn't something happening to us, it's just us, to use that language.
Mm.
And the appearance of self and other doesn't go away, but I think it loses its reification. It loses the unconscious impulse we have to take the appearance of our experience as if it's an accurate, reliable description of reality. And the whole thing starts to come into question.
Mm.
And then, from a Buddhist point of view, of course, I would say we're returning to basically formless awareness, open awareness. So let's say, to be simplistic, from a Western point of view,
Mm-hmm.
we go to emotional vulnerability. From
Yes.
a point of view, we go to open awareness, which I think is deeper, but that's my
Mm-hmm.
bias.
Yeah. So if we have both of them, so how did you guide when you worked with clients one on one? How did you guide both worlds, this Western and Eastern approach, this way of being, let's say, with panic or anxiety? So how did you guide someone? It's like, I'm having panic attacks or feeling anxious when I'm with a lot of people, or so how do you bring both these worlds together? I know you're right about it in your book as well, but I'm curious, how do you bring both these worlds together?
Well, let's say my view is that I don't think that it's possible, or to the point of bringing them together in some integration.
Mm,
It's more like having an intimate relationship
mm,
between Buddhism and psychotherapy, let's say, just like we might have an intimate relationship with one's partner, but we're not trying to become one integrated unit. We're
mm,
allowed the disturbance that we're both connected and separate to arise at all times, no resolution.
mm,
So I think inherent to any relationship experience, which is all relative experience, there's inherent disturbance. No resolution. But in this case, it seems to me that different people have access to different levels of tolerating and intellectual understanding of life experience, all sorts of things. So I try to be somewhat sensitive to the fact that different people might benefit from different types of engagement. But basically, I would say that I sort of invite somebody usually into some degree of immediacy because I have the view that we're only ever living in the immediate moment. That's the only location in which our habitual patterns are rising. It's the only location in which we can intervene in our habitual patterns. It's the only location in which we can investigate what seems to be most true at this moment. So that is pretty common in both sides. But if I were coming from a more therapy point of view, I might be curious about somebody's history. I don't spend a lot of time. I work in a transferential model, if that's familiar jargon or to your listeners. So they might have a lot of anxiety about whether their current partner is going to abandon them. And I might be curious, well, when people have that concern, it's not really about the future. In my experience, it's that feeling is coming up, triggered by something. They didn't return the phone call. They walked out of the room without, answering you or something. But it's possible that you already feel like an abandoned person. This is about something that might happen in the future, perhaps. But what was your young experience like? Have you looked at your childhood? Have you looked at your history? I mean, maybe you have a history that left you, unfortunately, feeling like an abandoned person. And if so, this current relationship might be triggering that, but it's not the cause. And if so, it won't be the solution. So you might want to consider the possibility of investigating having a kind relationship with feeling like an abandoned person off and on the rest of your life. But what would that be like if you just wanted to say out loud, I give myself permission to feel like an abandoned person off and on the rest of my life? And I invite that person to give it a try as an emotional exercise, see if it's going to kill them, to have a relationship with what might already be true. So then if I were to jump over to the Buddhist side, it would be more like, well, when you have this fear of abandonment, you don't like to feel that you have a history of being left by partners, blah, blah, blah. Can you invite that feeling of abandonment right now? And it doesn't matter to what extent. What would it be like to just bring your attention, allow your attention to settle into sensation level experience with absolutely no interpretation? Then we're more into the Vipassana sort of mindfulness type of approach, maybe. What would it be like just to be curious about what are the sensations that are arising when you believe that you're feeling abandoned? Well, my stomach's tight, my heart hurts, my throat's congested, whatever. Okay, and where is there any evidence of harm or damage? Where is it killing you? To just stay embodied with that vulnerability, that disturbance. If you stay out of any interpretations, no commentary, no identity stuff, you may find that abandonment isn't a sensation. Guilt isn't a sensation. Humiliation is not a sensation. Those are already dissociative escapes, perhaps, from immediate embodied vulnerability. So if you want to investigate that view, I don't tell them it's true, but if you want to investigate that view, you might, for a while, a month or two, just keep, anytime you claim that you're feeling abandoned, you could ask, oh, I wonder what I might be experiencing right this moment that I'm trying to escape from.
Experiencing in the body and
right. Not to answer intellectually, but just as a reminder, come back to sensation and hang out a bit. And you may find it's sort of the same type of sensation all the time, and you may find no evidence of harm. They find it's not permanent. There's no evidence about your worth as a person. And then if somebody happens to be interested in types of Buddhism include this, I might at some point say, well, what do you think it is that's aware of your feeling that your stomach's tight? What is aware of your feeling panic? And what is the nature of that awareness? I mean, is that awareness panicky? Is that awareness abandoned? Is that awareness
Mm,
problematic? Not to be answered intellectually. It's more like inviting somebody to experiment with sort of becoming, embodying the experience of inquiry, of curiosity,
mm,
question, not of answer.
mhm,
And so, what would it be like to just invite that presence of curiosity about awareness? What is aware? And what's the nature of this awareness? That's more maybe Mahayana, less Theravada, probably, but
mm.
it seems sort of that's where,
All the different branches.
yeah. But that in my training, that's where the potential for unconditional freedom arises with
Mm,
conscious relationship with open awareness, not just mindfulness. So that's my
mm.
piece.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what I'm hearing from you from both perspectives is there's a change in relationship to the experience. So you're using immediacy in both cases,
Yeah.
right? And I know you speak more about that quite in depth in the book in terms of developmental perspective and fruitional. And maybe we'll kind of define that in a moment. But so here's there's two approaches, and it's not about you unifying in a perfect world together, but it's like how can we have both? That's what I'm hearing. So how can we have both? How can we benefit from both? And you're bringing immediacy and saying, wait a minute, is there a way to be with this differently?
Right. And
Like
that's
if it,
control to Buddhism in general,
mm,
I'm sure you know, which is not so much of a focus on the content of our experience, but more
mm,
focus on how we relate to that content that carries more potential for transformative change. And I've
mm.
found that to be accurate for myself anyway.
In a way, it's also, I mean, what do you think in terms of, one of the therapies, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, the sense of like being with, um, how do you find that? What do you think of that approach? I'm just curious.
I haven't studied it. I've just heard secondhand from clients or somebody. It sounds good. It
Yeah.
sounds sort of very grounded in the sort of things we're talking about, but
Mm.
I know it from having studied it.
So yeah, it just, one of the things, one of the metaphors used there, and I use it often in my one-on-one work is the bus metaphor. And I really like that one. And it's, if you were driving a bus, an emotion of anger, so, whether it's your partner or a stranger or something upset you, if anger comes in, well, you let the anger into the bus, let them have a seat as a passenger, but you're still driving that bus. Because if anger takes a steering wheel, we may take action that we may regret. Say words that could be deeply hurtful, or act, or throw something, or whatever it is. But we can still allow our emotions to be there: anger, sadness, upsetness. It's not about just feeling nice and perfect all the time. And so that for me, I found it really useful in terms of applying the mindfulness approach, this working with, being with, and I'm hearing like all these elements. Obviously, your practice is incredibly deep, and your knowledge and understanding of various traditions is um, very deep as well. So I'm just trying to
At
bring
least,
it to.
at least I'm giving you that impression.
So I'm wondering if we talk a little more about relationships. How can disturbances be a vehicle for transformation?
Well, I would say it slightly differently, of course. I wouldn't say that the disturbances are the vehicle. I would
Mm.
say, in first of all, awareness of the existence of disturbance, which a lot of people are dedicating their lives to trying to never feel disturbed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to either have some genuine interest or they have to have bad luck, and life is forcing them to feel disturbed. But you have to be aware of disturbance before you're willing to investigate it.
Yes.
And
Can we
then,
define disturbance just for those? Because I loved it in your book. You speak about that, and that's like a quote that like stuck up for me. I'm like, oh, could be used as a vehicle of transformation. So, what is a disturbance even? Like, how, what just so we're
like any word. Words are defined by other words, So, but let's say that, just to be very simple, it's a type of experiencing that we don't like. It's a type
Mm,
of disturbance that either is sort of mildly disappointing or irritating, or it's a type of disturbance that actually, at the other extreme, feels like a threat to our survival.
mm,
Uh, but it's something that catches our attention usually. We tend not to ignore disturbance
mm,
because we want it to go away, or we want to solve it, or we want to do something about it. It's probably biological. It's probably
mm,
our evolutionary biology that we seem to have a nervous system that's organized around wanting to pull in what is safe and pleasurable, and
mm,
avoid or get rid of what is negative and disturbing or threatening. So, I think it's probably at the level of our nervous system. So we're not going to get rid of a disturbance by reframing or anything like that.
mm,
So I think the more accurate approach, and the approach that carries more potential for deeper change, is to commit to our experience of disturbance as something that will be with us probably every day of our life, many times a day until we die.
mm,
So we don't think, we start with our thinking maybe, but we train ourselves not to relate to disturbance as an aberration, as evidence of a problem that should be solved, and then we get a life without disturbance, but instead train ourselves to
oh,
invite disturbance as a valid part of being a sensitive human life form. And I think it's the commitment to this full range of experience, including what we call negative, that carries more potential for deeper change than just the experience of disturbance itself, which is going to be unique to that moment. Probably I'm disturbed because my food's cold, or the guy honked at me or something. Yeah, but when
mm,
that's past, what do I carry with me? So I have to go deeper.
mm,
I have to go deeper than immediate experience if we want deeper change that maybe unfolds a little faster than just a slow lifetime of observing. You know, we need
mm,
inquiry, I think, also.
mm. As you're sharing that, so for you, how do you apply it with your relationship, just having disturbance, like, in your book you talk about, like, daily disturbances in relationships, like that's it's not about like finding the perfect partner and it will be like blissful every day. I think that's the romantic movie version, that like once you find a partner, every day is going to be just amazing and you're floating in joy.
Maybe
Which is
someday.
not reality. But I mean, how do you work with the daily disturbances with a healthy loving relationship, like left a plate in the, didn't take the dish, didn't wash a dish, or left something on the table, and or whatever, like things, each person wants things to be a certain way, so that happens in a relation, right? Each person has certain things. So how do you work with your daily dose of disturbance in relationship?
Well, first of all, I assume it will be there. Uh, and, we've been married, almost like 45 years now. So, we've been through a lot of different
Mm.
phases, but I assume I'll be disturbed. I assume I'll have, given my style, I'll have an impulse to blame my partner. Some people would have an impulse to blame themselves, or to just
Mm.
space out, but mine is the more neurotic masculine sort of annihilate the other impulse. That's more my style, and so I assume that'll be there. And it's pretty rare now that, for me, I mean, you don't know if it's accurate, but it's pretty rare that I feel captured by that. It's more like blips that it's so familiar that I usually just say, "Whoops, time to step back a little bit, not talk about this issue, not
Mm.
get argument or discussion." Um, and then make a decision. Do I want to basically use this disturbance as part of my work of 100% responsibility for staying embodied and being responsible for
Mm.
whatever arises? And or do I want to use this situation as another endless part of negotiating with my partner basically about behaviors.
Mm.
So one of my many biases is that in conflict, I think it's helpful to keep one's emotional reactivity to oneself, because I think it's mostly about our own lifelong core vulnerabilities that we're still refusing to have a conscious embodied kind relationship with. That's why we want to involve our partner or somebody else.
Mm.
So to me, what's appropriate is for me to contain my emotional reactivity, not involve my partner, and not allow myself to be involved in my partner's reactivity, because that's about them. This is different than like Rosenberg or, people who say, well, here's how I feel. And,
Right.
approach is to talk through your emotions, which
Right.
is, I think it's valid, but I've just worked with a lot of people who can do that in a workshop where we have access to our adult capacities, and then they go home and they lose access to
Mm.
those higher functions, let's say, and
Mm.
are yelling at each other, and it escalates. So my bias is that, at least as a foundational practice, which might be a number of years, to keep one's emotional reactivity in relationship to oneself, do whatever practice we have as far as being kind to it, no story about it, let it have
Mm.
this wave-like life of its own. It's going to come and go. You don't have to.
Yeah.
But then on a relational level, I find it makes sense to me to basically talk in terms of behavioral, negotiating, problem solving language, where I just ask my partner if they're willing to behave in a different way.
Mm.
And later on, if either of us wants to talk about emotions, talk about emotions, but don't think that talk about emotions is likely to help behavioral changes, because people get triggered very easily.
Yeah.
So I might say, hey, are you willing to, you know, uh, put the toilet seat up when you're done with it?
Right.
Are you willing to, you know, take that stuff off the stairs by the end of the weekend? And my
Mm.
partner will say yes or no. It's not their responsibility to be who I want them to be, but
Mm.
if they have some awareness that improving the quality of relationship is probably to their benefit, and hopefully I would have that same awareness, then at some point down the road, not at first, it just becomes clear that treating our partner kindly with our behavior, regardless of our feelings, probably is to ours and their and others' benefit.
Mm. Mm.
So that's another sort of Buddhist sort of view, that feelings and behavior have no necessary connection with each other. That's not Western
Mm.
view. In West, if you have a feeling, it's inseparable from a drive state, and you need to do
Mm.
something about it. And that's why the analysts talk about sublimation. You have aggressive energy, you got to go play sports, or
Mm.
go hit a tree or something like that.
Mm.
A Buddhist view is that no, you don't have to do anything about your emotions,
Mm.
uh, except for have a conscious embodied relationship with them, and then you start having choice at that point.
Mm.
So you can behave in a certain way that's different than your feelings without it being repression, or you know uh, acting out, passive aggressive, or whatever behavior. You can actually have that choice to behave as a kind person while you're feeling anger, and
Right. Right.
about that except for be aware of it and take responsibility for it.
It's possible. That's like that bus metaphor again. It's like anger can be here, but the hands of the steering wheel of kindness can
Yes,
still
and
be angry. Yeah. Yeah.
and again, my bias would be to go beyond, to start there at the bus, but then to consider, well, maybe I'm the whole bus. Maybe
Mm.
I'm not the driver, because that's
Mm.
still maintaining sort of subject object,
Mm.
you know, duality on some level,
Mm.
if we take it seriously. Um, so it would be, first of all, like, well, no, the anger's me, the bus is me, the driver's me. So now what? And can I just participate as intimately as possible in all of those without taking any of them personally?
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
habit the feeling of being the driver, the feeling of being the anger person, the feeling of being the larger body that's containing these things, the larger field of awareness, whatever, so that I actually potentially start dissolving the more subtle level of suffering, which arises out of thinking that we're separate. Maybe
Hmm.
not just separate from others, maybe it's separate from our anger.
Yeah.
And so a good start is to be aware of and be kind and embodied, but we might want to keep going beyond that and not just
Mm.
stay at the level of, oh, I'm aware of this endless stream of experiencing, which is,
Mm.
I think, that's invaluable. It's
Mm.
foundational. But in my training, it might be helpful to continue inquiring beyond that point.
Mm. Yeah, as you're sharing this, I just want to go back to something you said earlier about boundaries. A couple and they're having a disagreement. It could be someone at work too, and have a disagreement with a colleague or some relation, right? A disagreement, and there's something about you naming. Okay, stepping back might be helpful right now. Stepping back, and what I'm wondering about is boundaries. How do we create boundaries so it doesn't create disconnection? Because sometimes when it's like, okay, not now, it may come across as a wall of disconnect. Boundaries, they're so difficult for us humans, aren't they?
Well, I don't know. We claim they are.
Just have to live longer and they'll become easier.
There's always boundaries. They're always there. What is difficult is not boundaries. What's difficult is conscious, embodied, open-hearted participation in boundaries, which is different. And
Mm.
that boundaries are hard because you can't be a life form without boundaries.
Yeah.
And so it's more about, in my
Mm.
opinion, I know people like to talk about that. Everybody has their own view, but I don't think it's possible to be disconnected.
Mm.
You can feel disconnected, but that means I'm pretending to be unaware of my own experience. It's
Mm.
not about me and others. My partner does something, I don't like it. I'm not willing to feel how vulnerable I am. So I'm just going to, pretend that I'm not feeling hurt or vulnerable or something like that. And it's my refusal to stay present and intimate with my immediate vulnerability that gives a rise to the fantasy that there's something missing there.
Mm.
There's nothing missing. I'm actively ignoring it. I'm trying to.
Mhm.
And then I can project that onto others or the relationship and claim, oh, there's a disconnect. And now I have to heal the disconnect in the relationship. And a lot of
Mhm.
people like to
Mhm.
think that way. I don't. To
But
me, always connected. And
mhm.
but we're all also always both separate and connected.
Connected. But
But separate is not the same as disconnected.
mm, something I'm wondering is, I'm just connecting to my own direct experience, not theory on my end. I have experienced that where, whether it's family or friends or relation, where it's like, feel so, maybe it's my own feeling, but so far away. I can't reach to them. I can't, I've had instances like that with like, my late father, who's so dear to my heart, who passed away. And it's like we had moments like that, where I still go, oh, I wish we didn't have that. Like we had moments of disconnect, especially as a teenager,
Maybe
where
they weren't disconnect.
mm,
Maybe that was the quality of connection that you
mm,
just didn't like. If it was a disconnect, he'd be like a stranger,
mm,
like passing a stranger, no big deal. The very fact that it was painful and that you
yeah,
had this yearning would, to me, suggest there was a profound connection there. But we don't like to feel that contrast, that disturbance. I
mm,
want more than I'm getting, so I'll just cut it off. Oh, well, that's easier. Now I don't get upset every day, just
right,
not there, Now, oh, but how do I heal my disconnect now? Personal,
yeah,
personal view.
yeah, yeah.
So
So in
to
a
me,
way, what you're saying, the disconnect is something we create in our mind to help us make sense of the pain.
yeah, so it help us not
Mm.
feel the pain.
Not feel the pain. Yeah.
Disconnecting from my pain, I think, and it's better. You know,
Mm.
I don't want to be overwhelmed when I'm a little kid. I don't want to be overwhelmed with grief and
Mm.
fear and rage and powerlessness, which all kids have to deal with to some extent, but especially if it's an abusive or neglectful or dysfunctional family or something, little kids have to disconnect from levels of experiential intensity that they do not have the capacity to process.
Mm.
And their parents probably are not going to help them. Their world they're in is unlikely to help them.
Yeah.
So kids, we all do our best by pretending not to be aware of what we can't process, what we can't
Mm.
handle consciously. We sort of learn, we have this amazing ability to sort of compartmentalize and
Yes.
there. So that's great. It's good for
Mm.
us. But like all young survival strategies, because they work, they are repeated over and over again. And that repetition becomes what we might call structure. And then that gets carried into adulthood.
Mm.
And so most of us are continuing to try our very best to take care of ourselves, really as best as possible. But
Yeah.
if we're still a young kid in our family of origin, around certain arenas like intimacy and relationships, especially
Mm.
other arenas like traveling to another country or something like that, we didn't do as a kid. It doesn't have those young associations, probably in
Mm.
certain ways. So there's a lot of areas of our life that we have more access to our adult capacities, but certain things, especially like relationship, are very evocative.
Yeah.
Our experience when we were, 1 month old, 3 years old, whatever, that's where a
Mm.
lot of the repetition happens that gets addressed in therapy.
Hmm. As I'm hearing you share this, it took me back to something else I've heard you speak about, which is going through life as a display. And in a way, it had that flavor. Can you share what that means for you, like approaching life like a display?
It seems to me that, especially if we start attending to immediate experiencing, immediacy, and permanence, that we increasingly discover that the nature of our experiencing is continual change.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that this uh, mug, that I have, doesn't mean that I can see it changing. It's more like it's my experience. My experience is impermanent. So that at every moment, there's a little microscopic movement and the light changes, or my mind wanders, or my muscles get a little fatigued, or whatever. It's just like uh, it's not like, oh, there's a diamond. How can that be impermanent? No, it's my experiencing that is a constant display. Meaning
Mm.
there's always experience arising, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, emotions, everything, and there's awareness of all of these things that are rising, not to be too dualistic about it, but there's that relative difference. And so this relative, always streaming, changing, flowing experience, I would just call it a display. And
Mm.
it's what we have to work with on a relative level. And it's never
Mm.
going to be resolved. It's never,
Mm.
can't freeze it. We can't pin it down. We can't rely on it being the same tomorrow as it is today. I mean, so we have a certain as if quality that we bring to our relative experience at a certain point. It's like, I'm going to act as if I'll be alive tomorrow, but I have this increasingly confident quality that I don't know if that's true.
Mm.
You know, it's as if I'm going to be alive tomorrow, but I don't know. I may or may
Mm.
not be. It's as if I'm going to cook this meal and like it because I have in the past. Well, maybe not. You know, it's just everything actually starts
Mm.
to have what in a certain type of Buddhist view starts to have this quality that we could call
Mm.
transparent of inherent significance, not visually transparent, but inherent of sort of that, like if somebody is doing like mindfulness, I think there's a tendency to take the object of awareness as if it has its own sort of quality. Oh, I'm aware of feeling irritated, or I'm aware of the anger on the bus, or I'm aware of this light reflecting off the floor. Oh, but then now it's the next thing. Now it's the next thing. Now it's the next thing. Sort of non-judgmental awareness, which is, I think, a almost irreplaceable foundation. It's not obvious how somebody's going to get very clear without that, without that sort of discipline. But I think there, in an unexamined way, it would be easy for somebody to sort of somewhat unconsciously assume that that anger has its own inherent existence. Partly because I'm moving on always to the next thing without investigating what is the nature, what is that gives rise to every microsecond of experiencing. And for, at least from a Mahayana point of view, all of our experience is co-arising at all times. There's no inherent objective nature to anything. No objective nature to my breath, no objective nature to my subject that is observing, no objective nature to this chair. But there's the appearance of presence, of solidity, of quality. And so there's this interesting simultaneity of vivid appearance, but no essential nature. Vajrayana, appearance emptiness. That there's a simultaneity of vivid appearance, but upon investigation, no evidence ever of objective existence. So that's sort of a little jargony. Does that make any sense?
Yes. well, you're providing, like you're saying, different wording that maybe some of the listeners are familiar with, and that is okay too. But there's something really deep underneath what you're speaking about in terms of how can we be in the world differently? How can we be in the world differently? And I want to just go back, and I know we're almost at the end, so I just want to go back to just another thing about relationships. So from your years of experience, what would you say are kind of what destroys relationships and what nurtures relationship? Like, I know it's not, I know it's not a simple, like, distilling, like, the top 3 things, but just, I'm sure you've probably seen some familiar things that really causes relationship to spiral and some to remain healthy.
I can make something up, but I don't think in that way. I think more in terms of what is this immediate situation right here might be helpful right now for myself or somebody I'm working with. What is it that they're pretending not to experience? What is it they are bringing fundamental aggression toward reality around, wanting reality to be other than it is around? What is it that they are retreating into self-absorption around when they get certain vulnerabilities triggered, things like that? So it's very immediate. But to make something up, I guess I would say that probably at the heart of what is harmful to relationship is a refusal to be aware of and have a relationship with experience that we don't like. And out of that, I think, comes, a tendency to close our hearts or to blame or to get absorbed in self-aggression, all sorts of dysfunctional patterns. But I think it's sort of at a relative accessible level, it's like a refusal to, on a much more subtle level, Buddhist level, it's ignorance. It's pretending that we're not aware of open awareness, but that's not accessible to most people. So we don't, that's not going to be helpful to offer that as advice. So it's more like anytime that I find I have an avoidance strategy, which is neurosis, whether it's passion, anger, or ignorance, whether it's positive, negative, neutral, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, whatever language we like, anytime I realize I'm in avoidance, to ask, what is it that I might be experiencing right this very moment that I'm trying to escape from? A commitment to keep coming back into immediate embodied vulnerability with some curiosity, not to heal it, not to process it, not to share it, not to whatever, just to start having an intimate relationship with those difficult aspects of our human experience that we've organized our life around avoiding, actually. And it's very slow work, of course, over time. But
yeah. What a beautiful way of describing it. And that's something I think that can be really helpful to consider is like, what am I avoiding right here?
It's not like I'm letting anger on the bus. It's like
Mm.
anger's been in the bus. It's just happened
Right.
speaking up at that moment.
Right.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
on a subtle level, we're still thinking anger is not us. It's out there.
Mm.
Now it's coming in. I have to find a way to work with it.
Yeah. Like the quality of investigating, like
Yeah.
investigating what's happening here. What am I avoiding here? That is the quality.
Especially to contrast it with mindfulness because it's not my main practice. But my impression from the outside is that it's very easy in mindfulness to sort of move through along with this stream of experiencing.
Mm.
And it might be, oh, I'm feeling some tightness in my chest right now.
Mm.
Now I'm feeling my throat's a little tight. Oh, now it's loosening up a little bit. Oh, now I'm aware of feeling a little hunger, like that. And
Mm.
so I think there's, from my impression, you can tell me if that's not accurate, but
Mm.
my impression is that there's less of a built-in inquiry about, oh, what is this tension about?
Mm.
What would happen if I actually took a little time and invited that disturbance, invited that pain, and just tried to be present and kind and keep it company with no agenda
Mhm.
of moving on or changing or healing or anything like that.
Mm.
Really saying, what is it like to just be intimate with myself as I am, rather than my spiritual practice goal? I'll accept myself in the future when I've cleared up my neuroses and I'm
Right. No, no. From my experience and from the teachers and mentors I've been with, what I've discovered in terms of how mindfulness works is both. So
good.
it is at times just knowing, oh, this is what's here right now. And oh, there's heaviness in the heart, there's sadness, there's upsetness. And there's one of my teachers often says, what is called for right now? Because right now, maybe what's called for is to sit with that and investigate that. Like, what is that? Not just intellectual level of analyzing or figuring out, but it's just like being with it a little closer.
Like what's called for, maybe kill the guy who has his finger on the nuclear trigger.
Yeah,
What's
exactly. I mean, exactly what is needed. Exactly. So it's not just, sometimes misconception of mindfulness is just observe until things are past. But that's very like surface level.
good? I'm
And,
glad to hear that.
yeah, and even at, retreats and that we have retreats through our center and have a chance to do those with Bob Stahl, who's an incredible teacher. And it surprises us, what comes up for people and as they meet things in a retreat setting of like being with, oh, now I'm understanding my sadness or my restlessness and like deep insights about who they think they are, about life. um Surprising. And they're not looking for it, and we're not kind of budging them to go hunt any insight, but things seem to arise with the use of mindfulness.
And then
With that.
are there follow-ups in terms of daily life where people are encouraged to investigate what's arising beyond just being aware of what's arising, or is it
Mhm.
situation?
Yes. Yes. So I'll give you an example like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, an 8-week program using mindfulness to work with daily life, with, pleasant, unpleasant, pain in life, joy in life. And we do that when we meet every week. Like what came up? What have you discovered about your pain, your anger? How are you with your pets, your child? And so that's what I deeply enjoy is like how to be with.
And do you ask the question, what is it that's aware of that pain?
Hmm. And how do you know awareness? Were you aware of being aware? And like what what is awareness? Yeah. This has been, I'm just wanting to be respectful of the time. We went over quite a bit because it's been so enjoyable, and I feel like we literally can keep going on because we barely touched actually things I wanted to ask you about. I had a list of like, I don't know, like 8 more questions that I was hoping to, about your book, and maybe what I'll do is I'll put the link to the name of your book, those of you interested, and link to your website. Any final words for viewers just about if they've been curious about meditation
Just an encouragement to consider the two fundamental reference points of a lot of Buddhism, which is awareness and compassion.
Mm.
And in terms of daily life, that might mean if somebody's really interested in relieving unnecessary suffering on one hand and moving toward what might be an experience of freedom on the other hand,
Mm.
it's hard to go wrong if you practice bringing your attention and your awareness back into immediate experience, not just when there's problems, but anytime it occurs to you.
Mm.
Set your watch to beep, and once every hour, just come back. What am I experiencing? What am I experiencing? No
Mm.
goal, no
No
nothing
agenda.
agenda. And then on the other side, the compassion in terms of daily practice is just basically starting off with kindness. And so
Mm.
when we bring our attention into immediate experience, then practice opening our heart to whatever it is we find, whether we like it or don't like it, or whether it's boring or meaningful or superficial. No exceptions. Just experiment and investigate what would it mean to be
Mm.
unconditionally kind at everything I'm experiencing without exception. And that's both of those, I think, are very reliable ways to bring the basic points of practice without having to worry about what school you're going to follow or what practices you're doing or something like that. So.
Mm. Well, maybe his words of wisdom ripple to more kindness in the world for all of those who listen and hear. And I truly want to thank you for your time and your generosity of sharing and speaking.
Sure.
Thank you. And I also want to thank viewers and listeners for taking the time. If you found this useful and helpful, feel free to share, like, and if you haven't done already, subscribe. May your moments be filled with ease and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you.